Okay, we're good.
Hi. Hi, I'm Deborah Lucci from the Deborah Lucci team from William Raveis Realtors. We're located here in Andover, Massachusetts, North Andover, about 35 minutes outside of Boston. And we have a guest here today. But first, I'd like to introduce some team members. We have Amanda Perlmutter, Nicole Leahy, and Diana Silva. And our special guest is Tim O'Neill from Bigfoot Waterproofing. And Tim, we are just loaded with questions for you today. Now, how did you start in this? How long have you been doing it? Where do you work out of?
Sure. So I've been in construction since I could walk, I guess, is where we start. Waterproofing specifically, my family owned a waterproofing company down in the Cape years ago. Was doing that for probably 8 to 10 years. Then moved into deep foundation drilling, which also involved some waterproofing. Not residential stuff, but a lot of commercial, big projects. I'm out of Haverhill. I've been doing Bigfoot is official as of January, although Bigfoot's been around for quite a while. It's officially 100% going. We're booking.
You did great with your marketing, getting out there right out of the gate. You were very good. You got my attention right away.
Thanks.
So
I think most of the marketing is just the conversation, right? Like just having a conversation is how you get out there. So I enjoy talking, so that works.
So I just, I have to be honest with you. I've had personal experience with water, and I was discussing this a little bit about. I bought a house and it had no water in a certain section of the basement for 17 years. I talked to the previous owner who had nothing to hide at all. And of course, I finished that section of the basement, and then we had this huge storm, and everything was soaking wet. So I got water. It was 3 times, and then the third time, I just, like I said to you, I shut the door of the basement, went upstairs, and had wine, and just did not want to deal with the basement anymore. So, talk to us about where does most water come from? Is it under the ground? Is it coming? Is it melting? What are some of prevention measures? Things like that.
So first, short-term wine's definitely a good reaction. That's fine. Go
Thank you.
upstairs and have a couple glasses. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that exact story. Like I've been here 15 years or 25 years, never had an issue, and then all of a sudden last week we just got flooded. And something like that, there's so many unseen things that could affect it. If there's development in the area that change the ground and how the rainwater falls, and there's less trees near you now, so there's more water, there's more runoff coming at your house. All of that stuff makes a difference. There's really 2 spots that the water can come from. Either it's groundwater or the water table rising, or it's rainwater falling. And really, waterproofing is more water control or water drainage than it is so much waterproofing, because there's always going to be water in some degree, right? If it rains, the ground gets saturated and there's water coming in. So as long as it's draining to where we want it to drain, then you don't have any issues. Obviously, when it starts draining where you don't, then issues arise. And that's kind of like that where you finished it off. I mean, that figures always, right? It's here we go, we're going to finish the basement off and now we get water. But it could have been any number of things. Even the groundwater that had been there for 17 years moved the silt. Like you had good gravel underneath your foundation and the water was running fine and draining off, and just over the years gets filled with sediment and silt, and then the water kind of gets backed up and starts pushing on the foundation itself.
Do you remember the Mother's Day storm? Everybody's too young except me. Oh my God. If you didn't get water in your basement in Andover, you were extremely lucky.
Yep.
So it was tough selling real estate when people are trying to come in the house and you get like a foot of water in the basement, and
Sure.
it was tough at that time. That was one of the worst storms I've ever seen.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, this year's been a good year for proving water issues with the snow and melt and then rain on top of the snow, and that's all perfect for water intrusion.
So I'm sure the ladies have questions.
Sure.
Yeah, I have a couple actually. So how do you tell when you go into a basement if there is or was water damage? Because I feel like when I bring buyers through, they look at anything in a basement and they're like, oh, nope, there was water damage. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like,
Right.
they think every little thing is past water damage. So
like, first, everybody knows what that white fluffy powder is on the wall, right? That's called efflorescence. So that's a sign of moisture. Some people think it's mold. It's not mold. It's just water. It's moisture coming through the concrete or the cementatious product, whatever it is, and evaporating and leaving behind the salts and the minerals and stuff that was in the water. So that's all that is. But that is a sign of water intrusion. As far as flooding goes, watermarks, if there's anything on the ground, like a 2x4 bench or something, you look at the bottom of the bench and you can see. I mean, the efflorescence is a good one. Typical water staining is pretty good too. But it all depends.
But then sometimes you have something from a hot water tank.
Yep. I was going to say that too, right? If a hot water tank's sitting on the ground, they all eventually just rot out on the bottom. So that's something. But the efflorescence is definitely water intrusion to some extent.
okay.
And if it's serious, you'll see running stainings down the wall or. So.
Okay. And I was going to ask too, so should an owner such as myself even be proactive about waterproofing a basement, even if has been no water issues in the past?
Yep. Anytime, one of the things I always tell homeowners is there's a lot that you can do too. You don't have to call an expert to take care of some issues, right? Grading on the outside and your downspouts are two of the biggest things a homeowner can do on their own. Kick your downspouts off, minimum 6 foot away from the foundation, although that can vary. I'd go further if you can. If you can get them buried and have them dump out as far away from the property as possible, that helps. Because if you take the square footage of your roof and divide that by how many downspouts you have, all that rainwater is then sitting right at the bottom of that downspout. And then grading around the foundation, like anything to pitch away, 6 inches on 6 feet, 6 inches on 10 feet, somewhere in there. Any of that rainfall hits and starts running away from the foundation immediately. Those are some of the proactive things you can do without really getting into too much work,
How do you actually go about, I was on the website and I learned a little bit about how you actually do it, but does everything have to be out of the basement? Like, how do you waterproof it?
It's kind of tough, actually, even just saying, like, what is waterproofing? There's so many things. It's like, what is being a real estate agent, right? It's kind of the same thing. Like, you can be a residential, you can be rentals, you can be commercials. There's so many different products and systems that you can actually use to waterproof the basement. So it kind of depends on specifically what the issue is, and then what the goal is for the homeowner or the client. Something like a crack or a cold joint, and a cold joint is just easy enough as new concrete to old concrete. That's usually a typical spot, or the wall floor interface where the wall actually meets the floor. That's a cold joint as well. Something like that, if it's just seeping into there, you can usually inject it, hydroactive injection grout, and it seals it up as long as that water has somewhere to go once that area is sealed, so it doesn't push up somewhere else. So like it really depends. Like if you have a crack and everything else is fine, but it's leaking through that crack, you might be able to just do the injection, then deal with some grading on the outside to make sure that water's pitched away. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the whole entire basement, or everything have to be cleared out. Like I was saying earlier, there's varying degrees of every solution.
Okay, that's good to know, because I feel like some people would get, they have a lot of stuff in their basement and storage, and having to get it all cleared out would be overwhelming. But that's good to know.
Sure.
Now, I think the basement that I had, it had water under the basement. But how do you get rid of something like that?
So you really can't get rid of groundwater. You can only direct it. You can only manage it, right? That's kind of what I was saying too. Like, it's not like waterproofing is kind of, although you do waterproof certain situations, it's more about managing the water issue, right? So if you have a water table that's high, you can manage that with pumps, sump pump installation, French drainage installations systems. And that comes down to, or a lot of that comes down to like where you set the pump. Like say your water table is just below your foundation, you don't get issues other than when it rains really hard and the next day it starts coming in. That might just be an issue of where you set that pump in the sump pump. So it's not consistently on, but it relieves that pressure before it can build on the foundation. So you really, like, the groundwater issue is a tough one. You really can't stop groundwater. It's as it rains and the water table comes up, that's just what happens. You can only redirect it.
So I was in a really old home over the weekend, and the basement floor was dirt. What types of issues does that present?
Sure. I mean, you can have, well, it's not necessarily an issue, but you obviously have more moisture transfer through dirt than you would concrete. If you have high groundwater, or the ground table or the water table is a little bit high in that area, it could saturate that and just become mud. There's not necessarily anything wrong with it. A little dirty. But those things I'd watch out for. You know, it's even that, like pouring a basement slab really isn't that big of a deal. Depending on the size and how much work goes into it, but it's really not as, you know, like, oh, we got to pour concrete and put rebar down and plastic. It's like it's very overwhelming, which I understand if you haven't done it. It's really not that big of an issue either. If it's something that somebody wanted to take care of, we could pretty easily.
And would you advise somebody do that if they were to purchase a house with a dirt floor?
Yeah, if they were planning on, well, if your utilities are down there, you definitely want to do something. You could do like a vapor barrier down there too. You wouldn't have to necessarily pour a floor, but if your utilities are down there, moisture, you're going to have more moisture than you would want. Yeah.
Okay.
I suppose it would have to be specific, you know, again, specific to the situation, but that could be advised for sure.
Thanks.
So
Yeah.
Tim,
Sorry, go ahead.
sorry. So sometimes they put French drain systems on the outside of the house, and sometimes they put them on the inside. Like why? What's the difference?
Well, so on new foundations, really, ideally you'd want both on the inside and outside. I think what you're talking about is outside on top, right? So maybe a foot down from where grade is. Yep. So that's to catch like runoff, not so much groundwater, right? Actually, we have a job lined up in a couple of weeks. They're at the bottom of a hill. There's a hill that comes down to the street, then across the street, then down, and then their house is right there. So all that water comes, when it rains, it comes cranking down the hill over the street and then right into their property. And it's not, their foundation is fine, it's sound, it's just getting overwhelmed with water. So we want to capture that water and kick it off away from the foundation. So that perimeter drain outside, that's what that's there to capture, is the runoff. The perimeter drain on the inside is to help with groundwater, right? Or as your water table comes up. And obviously rainwater affects the water table and groundwater, but those are kind of the two different scenarios you'd use them for.
Do you guarantee, or like if someone were to go with you, do you guarantee the work or have a warranty for it? How long
Yep,
is that?
there's guarantees, and I hate to keep saying specifics, but depending on what you're doing, like say you only had a crack, it's guaranteed where that product is applied, where that system's applied, right?
Okay.
If that's the only issue, then you're good. You know, depending on what's going on in the basement and the situation and what you're trying to do. Like if you're trying to finish off the basement and you have some issues here and there, there's a bigger step you want to take to guarantee that you don't have any issues. So like on that crack, if we're injecting it with the hydroactive grout, it's guaranteed where applied, because the one downside to doing, you know, step process like that is we can find the water finds somewhere else to go, you know. Does that make sense? Did you say that right?
Yeah, so like if it's gonna go somewhere else, like where would it go? Like in another crack or?
Right, so it could go to another crack, right? So here's like, I actually just finished a project on Monday. Brand new foundation, everything was good. The drainage system worked perfectly. There was a high water table, so they were dealing with a large volume of water. They ended up getting a small hairline crack at the bottom of the bulkhead doorway. So the water was coming down, and because water finds the path of least resistance, it was coming out of that crack before it could get to the perimeter drain on the outside.
Okay.
So once I sealed that crack, now the water can get into the drainage system and get out, and there was no issues.
So what is really the majority of what you do? What if you go in, like, what is it? Is it French drains? Is it just sub pump? Is it sealing? You
So
must be dealing with mold too.
it's well, I don't deal with mold actually. That's
Okay.
that's a whole different situation. Mold actually isn't, in my experience, isn't as prevalent as like we all think. Musty doesn't necessarily mean mold. Moisture doesn't necessarily mean mold. And again, that white fluffy stuff that's not mold, that's efflorescence, right?
Mhm.
So there, in my experience, I see less than I think people assume is there. Excuse me. Sorry, what was your question again?
Yeah, so like when you go into somebody's house, like the majority of what you do, is it French drains? Is it sub pumps? Is it just sealing cracks? And
So it's probably the breakdowns, probably 50% sealing cracks and 50% like drainage systems is probably what it is. And I work with 603 Basement Solutions that does a lot of that bigger work. We work hand in hand on that end. They do a awesome job on crawl spaces too. That's a big real estate thing, right? Don't look in the door into the crawl space. You know, the spider webs everywhere and insulation falling down and water everywhere. And those are easily taken care of too. As scary as they look, it's really not that big of a deal to seal that up.
Mm-hmm. If people were wondering the costs, I know it's probably specific to the house, but what would be like a rough estimate?
So that the crack that I just injected on the bulkhead doorway, so they actually lost the deal. They had a buyer and they lost the deal, and it ended up being $1,500 to fix the crack.
Oh, okay, so not a ton. I thought it would might be more.
Unbelievable.
No, and I've even done, less. We've done more with less, right?
Right.
We've solved smaller problems with less. Some of the drainage systems, you can get, depending on the size of the property and all that, but you can get, 25,000 with a full system, everything soup to nuts,
Okay.
Depending on the size and all that. But
Yep.
a typical sump installation with a backup battery pump, it's like 2,500. Well, it's not, they're not, when you're, especially on the real estate end, when you're talking about it there, it's like, it's not chump change anytime you're spending money, obviously, isn't, but, comparably, it's not as drastic as sometimes we all think.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, yeah, that $1,500 crack sounds like well worth it.
Right.
so what's the difference between you and Crack X with the cracks?
So there's a couple different things we do differently. I mean, ultimately, we're there to do the same thing.
Okay.
Specifically me, I'm quoting the work. As far as the injection stuff, I do all the work. Me and my son actually do the work. My wife's in the office. So when I come to see the property and the issue, I deal with it. You deal with me from start to finish. So there is no middleman there. I believe they do an epoxy system where they actually use epoxy on the crack and then put ports in the epoxy and inject into the crack, which is definitely a usable, productive system. I like drilling into the crack. So you have your crack coming down this way, come at a 45-degree angle and drill a 3/8 or a half-inch hole in and intersect that crack actually inside the wall. And it kind of just gives me a little more peace of mind where I'm pumping the product into the crack in the wall. So once I see the product coming out of the crack, I know that void is actually filled. And typically it's pumped till you see product on the outside as well, which is kind of overdoing it, but I like seeing the results in real time, because obviously you can't see on the other side of the wall, right? But they do a lot of work. They do good work. I haven't heard any complaints about them, for sure.
No, I haven't either. Yeah.
I'm trying to offer a little bit more guidance as well, right? Like, I like having these conversations because I like solving problems, as cheesy as that sounds. But I just, when there's water coming in and I know I can fix it. Like, I like having these conversations, but you guys go, oh, basement's wet, I'm petrified, forget it, I'm gonna go drink wine. right? Like I like getting in there and figuring it out and solving it, and then at the end of it going, nice, we got on the other side of it, and it's and you can rest easy, kind of thing.
So why do builders not like gutters? And, gutters are, I didn't like gutters, and I had this really pretty house in Andover, and I really didn't want gutters because I didn't think they would look that attractive in front. But after I put them up, they really blended into the house. They were fine. It was no big thing. But it seems like builders are not big on gutters.
So I'd say that that's probably the biggest thing, is it just doesn't look right. Other things though, how the valleys and the gables and all that stuff come down, like you may have an overwhelming amount of water coming off of some section that wouldn't actually get captured by gutters.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, I'm not quite sure. Other than that, it definitely changes the look a little bit, but I think the having a little more control over your property with the gutters and being able to direct that water somewhere else is more important to me than how they might look on the house itself.
What experience have you had, ladies?
Yeah. I was going to ask you a question though, real quick. So right now, everyone seems to be waiving contingencies, but they're maybe doing an inspection beforehand. Would you be available, or have you done anything where you've come out before they put in an offer and just kind of check out a basement?
Yep. And I've been doing guaranteed 48 hours. So if you see a property and it's got water issues, call me, and if we can schedule it within 48 hours, I'm there.
Okay. Perfect.
And can you be incognito where you look like, the buyer's best friend?
I can look right.
Don't wear a tool belt.
No. Yes.
What does something like that cost, like a pre-inspection?
It depends. It depends on where it is. Like what's that specific? I know. But typically, I mean, it's like I usually charge $150 an hour for consulting. It's something like that. If there's always something to be worked out. If it's something that they're really going for and they need this to actually settle the deal, everything's worth a conversation. We can waive that. Not a huge deal. I'd more rather meet your client and then have them have their waterproofing guy now, right?
Mm-hmm.
That means more to me than the 150 or whatever it ended up being to get out there. So
That's good to know.
sure.
What else, ladies? All right, so we don't have to have exact addresses here, but tell us your biggest horror story regarding water in basements.
So this is easy.
Yeah, it's not in our area, I hope.
No, it was actually Mashpee, Massachusetts.
Oh,
So this was years ago, and it was a nice piece of property, nice little house. I don't know how old it was, and I don't remember the exact measurements, but there was a cranberry bog above where this house was, and it was only, say, 300 yards away from the cranberry bog, and they were maybe 75 feet below the cranberry bog. So that was constantly being saturated. They're below the water table. They had 2 1-horsepower, 2-inch discharge sump pumps that were running consistently, and their electric bill was like $1,500 a month. Just for those pumps. Yeah, it was bad.
Wow.
That was like, maybe we just want to abandon the basement kind of stuff. Like we did stop it, but we couldn't stop that groundwater. So we did with the adjustments and as much drainage as we could, as well as a few different actual waterproofing products. We got it to where it wasn't leaking, and we were containing the drainage, but it was still pretty drastic. That was a tough one to, that was a tough conversation to have with the homeowner, like, because you want to give them the good news. Yeah, that was tough. That's probably the worst I've ever been in.
Wow, that's a lot of money every month.
Oh.
And it's hard too. It's hard too when you go to sell it. You have to disclose that, and that's hard. That's
yeah. They
hard.
were, they were bumming out. It was tough, for sure. But that is not typical. I haven't seen anything close to that. So.
Now, do you ever install dry wells?
Sure. Yep.
Okay, so talk about the purpose of those.
Sure. So a dry well is just, in simple terms, it's a big hole with a bunch of gravel in it. That's literally what it is. You can have an encasement in there of, a plastic drum or a concrete drum or something, but basically it allows the water to disperse in an area that we want it to. So whether it's your downspouts or your pump, your sump pump or perimeter drain or anything draining into it, basically it's just a huge area for the water to go and then dissipate into the ground. That's all it's there for.
Interesting.
And they're depending on specifics again, but depending on the material you're in, they can be, as big or as small as, say like a trash barrel, or, I've done any maybe 12 foot around, 4 feet deep that we did, because it was some like silty clay. So the ground wouldn't absorb the water as fast as we really like it to. So I kind of had to make a bigger area for the water to disperse in.
So what have you seen lately out there that seems to be of interest? I mean, like, are the products changing in your business at all?
A couple of the products are. I mean, everything sadly is getting more expensive. Some of the injection products the prices have gone up quite a bit, which is a bummer, but they're still relatively cheap for what they do. Couple different products I used for that injection stuff. I've changed around a little bit. I think I was just talking to somebody, some of the compounds that they put in there has changed a little bit. So I've noticed a little bit on that, but it's all still good quality product. So yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. And that being said, I have noticed that people have heard more about the injection system. Like everybody knows what a sump pump is. Although that's a good point. Everybody knows what a sump pump is, but what does a sump pump actually do? Right. And I said it before as far as the drainage, but it's literally there to just relieve the pressure on the foundation. So as the water table comes up, it falls into the sump pump. If you can kind of visualize that underneath the foundation, as the groundwater comes up like this, it has somewhere to go.
I've seen some sub pumps like completely full to the top when I've gone to houses, and it's scary. You're like, what's happening here?
Yeah. Well, kind of back to like where you set the trigger on the pump depends on how much that turns on, and maybe that property that you were in, maybe there is a high water table there, so they set it a little bit higher than they normally would, or you normally would in a typical installation, so that it wasn't running consistently, or somebody forgot to plug it in. That happens a lot.
Yeah, I know with our house, we had a sub pump. This was many, many years ago. Not my last house. I had many years ago. We had a sub pump, and then, the electricity would go out.
Mm-hmm.
And so the sub pump would fail and the whole basement would fill up. And, how long does sub pumps typically last for? I know there's all different types and stuff, but
the like the cast iron sump pumps, I think they have 5-10 year warranties on them, but they could last like a nice Zoller pump. I've always liked Zoller. They'll last for a lifetime potentially. But there's also systems, speaking of the power going out, there's also systems with backup battery pumps.
Yeah.
So in an event that you lose power, you have something that can maintain the water. That's huge.
So you drink less
because
wine.
most people are like during a storm are getting water, and that's when you lose power. So it's like, what's the point?
Yeah, right. You do all this preparation work, and then the storm hits, and nothing's working. Yeah, they're key.
Especially in Andover with all these trees.
Yeah.
So girls, do you have any more questions?
No.
So Tim, we're going to see you around. You did a great job. You caught my attention very quickly. So I appreciate that. He got me on a phone call.
Absolutely.
And we always have good use for basement issues and things like that. So it sounds like also the cracks that you're dealing with, you're fixing them a little bit structurally as well.
Yeah, there is some structural, depending on the materials you use, there is some structural quality to it.
Mm-hmm.
If there are structural issues, that's something I have contacts, engineers and stuff that I can reach out to if that's an issue.
Okay.
whether it's specifically waterproofing or worrying about the structural integrity of the foundation. That's something that.
Yeah, there was a house I had listed at one point that had a crack in all four.
Yeah. Actually, another horror story. We went into a basement there. It was basically half the house had dropped about 6 inches on a 10-foot span.
Wow.
And they determined that the backfill they had used on the property had some tree stumps in it.
Yeah.
So over 25, 30 years, the tree stumps, just disintegrated and foundation started slipping. And there are systems that can help that. I mean, there's a bunch of different things you can use. On that property, we used a helical pile system. And although that's not specifically what I do at Bigfoot, I have contacts and have done it in the past. It's pretty cool. You screw basically like a big screw into the ground, and a certain amount of rotation torque equals a certain amount of compression strength, and then it's bolted onto the foundation and will literally hold the foundation from moving.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, Tim, how do people get a hold of you if they want to use your services?
Sure, BigfootWaterproofing.com, BigfootWaterproofing@gmail.com, or 978-338-4545.
That's perfect. Tim, it was so nice for you to come on. We really appreciate you chatting with us, and I'm sure our homeowners appreciate the information you gave them.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Tim.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.